All right, well, good evening, everybody.
Good evening.
Thanks for being here. I know there was a bunch of different things you could have probably done with your time tonight, and you chose to be here instead, which honestly is probably one of the best decisions that you could have made. Before we get started, I just want to go over a couple of housekeeping items. First and foremost, I do want to thank Fairway Mortgage for hosting the event. The drinks and the snacks are courtesy of them. Secondly, tonight's going to be basically three parts. The first part is going to be the presentation by Ryan, and then following that is going to be a formal question and answer session. So if you do have questions during the presentation, just write them down, hang on. There will be an opportunity to get them answered. And then the third portion is going to be more of an informal setting where you can mingle, talk to some of our team members, get maybe some more individualized questions answered, and discuss next steps if it's something that sounds like it's the right fit for you. After the presentation's completed, you'll probably find that you're going to fall into one of three different categories. I like the stoplight analogy. We got red lights, we got yellow lights, and we've got green lights. After Ryan's done with his material, you'll know if you're a red light. You'll have understood the information, and it's just not going to sound like it's a fit for you. That's okay. We don't have any Ginsu knives in the back that we're going to try and sell you. Nobody's going to chase you down the hallways. Just thank you for coming. And I hope you find a vehicle that fits your financial plans for yourself. Maybe you're going to be a yellow light where you're going to like what you see, but you're not going to be sure how it can apply for you right now. That's okay. We specialize in helping people establish game plans to get into real estate investing, and that's going to be developed over a one-on-one conversation with members of our team and our lending partners to develop what's right for you. And the last category is going to be the green lights. You'll know if you're a green light. It makes sense. You want to get started yesterday. Hang around. Make sure you connect with us afterwards so we can get a time on the calendar to sit down and get this started for you. One last thing. We are the digital age. Please silence your phones. Turn the ringers off. If you're like me, you'll take notes on your phone. That's fine. Just make sure the volume's all the way down so it doesn't interrupt the presentation. And with that, I just want to give you a little bit of information about who you're going to be hearing from tonight. In life, there's two types of people that we usually find. There's travel agents and there's tour guides. Travel agents sit in an office, and they send you to wonderful exotic destinations, but they only know what you've read on the brochure. They've never actually been there. And then there's tour guides. They've been there. They know the good places to go. They know the places that you want to avoid, and they're going to go with you through that destination so you can have the time of your life. Ryan Schroder is a tour guide. Not only does he know this industry inside and out, but he's also done this from the ground up. He's got the knowledge and he's got the practical experience. Ryan's currently licensed as a broker. His career in the industry goes back about 14 years. He got his start selling hotels and then businesses, and then he transitioned into residential and commercial real estate investing, as well as buying and selling. He owns VSM Real Estate. He's a co-founder of the company and currently operates as its principal and CEO. He's also a licensed general contractor. He wants to cover the whole aspects of the market. As far as his investment portfolio, he has ownership interest in 50-plus residential properties. He's done buy, fix, rent 60 different times, and he's done buy, fix, sell 20 additional times. All of that's just to say this. You have an opportunity tonight to hear from somebody who not only knows what he's talking about, but he's done it. So without further ado, Ryan Schroder.
Thanks, Jake. Well, thank you all for coming out. And as Jake mentioned, I know it's like 80 degrees outside, and there's other things you could be doing, so I appreciate you coming here tonight. And by the way, I've got business cards out front, but if you want to take my email down, that's definitely the best way to communicate with me if you have questions about this after we get into it. So there's a couple of slides here in gray, and the common theme is it's more a little bit about money management and in theory rather than actual practical application. So I've always liked this. I believe it's a Confucius saying, if I'm not mistaken. The best time to plant a shade tree was 20 years ago, and the second best time is today. The reason I bring that up is because a lot of times people ask me right now, oh, well, I would like to invest in real estate, but is it really a good time? The market's overheating, prices are up, things like that. It's true. The best time for you to have done this was in 2011. So in 2007, the real estate market started its descent, and then in 2008 and 2009, there was some government intervention that was designed to try and kind of slow the spiral, and it really didn't hit bottom until 2011. However, it resumed back to its previous highs by 2017. So the Great Recession that everybody talks about was a 6-year blip on the radar. So if this isn't a great time, the good news is as long as we don't have a correction of a magnitude much greater than the last one, you're talking about maybe a 6-year time period until you're back where you started. So just to let you know, we're going to be touching on these subjects right here, and they're all going to be on a little bit on the brief side. And the reason that is because I don't have 25 hours to teach you guys all today. We're going to talk a little bit about the differences between the model in buying and fixing to rent and buying and fixing to sell. We're going to talk a little bit about the financial analysis. The only one that I'm going to really go too deep into is the cap rate, because it's such an important thing for you to understand when you're evaluating a rental property. And then we're going to talk a bit about the rehab analysis. So this is an incredibly important part of the process, and frankly, the reason that I decided to go out and get my general contractor's license so that I could understand and control that variable a lot better. We're going to talk a little bit about the rental analysis. So what will the property rent for? How will you know? What can you do to assure that that's correct? And then we're going to touch on lending. And we have a lender here in the house, Brian Kurzweil, with Fairway Mortgage. I'll let you go to him with the specifics, but I know enough to be dangerous and to talk about it. And then we're going to talk a little bit, just very briefly, on property management and what you need to know. And basically what you need to know is to hire us. So one common element between buying and for the purposes of flipping or for renting is the actual buying process. So this is where the money is really made. You have to buy right. So when I say that you're making the buying decision is the most important part, so we like to go after either one of two different types of distressed situations. One is the property itself is distressed, and the other is the owner is distressed, okay? So when we talk about a home that's distressed, oftentimes they're properties that are 30 or 40 years of deferred maintenance. So the majority of the properties that I've bought are typically under this camp. So, and then another one would be hoarders. This has always been one of my favorite opportunities, is the hoarder situation. We bought a property in St. Paul on 453 St. Clair for $100,000. I'm sorry, that was 420 View, excuse me. And it had we needed 3 40-yard dumpsters just to get all of their stuff out of it. Nobody wanted to walk through the house. Nobody had any interest in it. But in 2 days with 3 guys, we got it all cleared out. And just by doing that, we probably could have turned around and sold it for $40,000 more than we paid for it. So don't be afraid to get your hands dirty a little bit. And then bad tenants. That was the one I was referring to when I mentioned 453 St. Clair. This was an owner who had tenants who had been there for a long time. They beat the property up. They weren't paying their rent. They weren't doing anything the right way. The owner just threw their hands in the air and said, "I'm tired of this. I don't want to do this anymore. I just want to sell it." So that property in particular, we bought for $100,000. We put $54,000 into it, and then we got it appraised for $230,000. After it was said and done, we sold it a year later for $255,000. So it was a little over $100,000 that we made on it in a year. So just remember that someone else's problem is your opportunity. And then distressed sellers. So sometimes it's divorce. Let's just say, for example, husband and wife own a house together. He steps out on her for his mistress, and basically she's like, "I don't want to be in this house that we shared anymore. I hate you." She's going to want to sell it fast, all right? Inheritance. We've gotten a couple properties this way, too. It's been pretty wild. couple of heirs or something like that. There's 3 of them. One's in Massachusetts, one's in California, and one's in New York. They inherit a property in Minneapolis. None of them want to come back. They're all too busy. They just want to sell it fast, cash, get their money, move on. So that's another example of an opportunity. The biggest opportunity in terms of volume, though, is the foreclosure and pre-foreclosure stuff. So in Minnesota, we have a little bit of a quirky foreclosure process. So once you've been late on your mortgage and the bank starts that foreclosure process, they'll actually have what's called a sheriff sale, and that's when the bank typically is the only one who bids on your property, and then they set a value in which they'd be happy to receive this amount of money to not have to deal with it anymore. And then for 6 months, they call it the redemption period, that homeowner could come up with that money, pay them off, and then get out of that property. What's nice about it is for the homeowner, if they're able to come up with the money to buy it out in the redemption period, it's going to count on their credit as a short sale rather than as a foreclosure. So it's about a 2-year hit as compared to a 7-year hit. So you have that in your back pocket when you talk to people. So an example of how you can use this to your advantage is all of the counties in the metro that are, the sophisticated ones, they have on their website a foreclosure list. You can look at them. You can find out what's going into foreclosure. Now, let's say, for example, the house says its redemption amount is $202,000. And you take that address, you punch it into Google, and you see that it's worth $300,000. Well, you should be licking your chops at that because that's an opportunity for you to go to that homeowner and say, hey, let me ease the burden of this foreclosure that you have impending and make this go from a 7 to a 2-year hit. Sometimes you got to grease the wheels with a little bit of, here's some money for your down payment on your apartment or something like that, but that's how that's done. And then the immediate need to sell. So that could be anything from, we bought a property, actually it's right here in downtown St. Paul, from the guy who owned Thor Construction. And he was in the process of getting the bid for the U.S. Bank to be kind of second in command and to build that. And he basically said, hey, I want to get cashed out of this deal right away. What can you do? And we ended up negotiating a $400,000 discount off of the purchase price because of their need to sell it immediately. So keep in mind, these are the main types of value that you're going to be finding. So the process to actually buy, fix, and hold is a little different than the process to buy, fix, and flip. So I'm going to talk first about the hold, and it's pretty self-explanatory. You're going to buy the property. You're going to do what it takes to rehab it, make it desirable for a tenant, make sure that it's safe, make sure that it meets city compliance, things of that nature, and then you're going to have to lease it out. So that's one of the things that VSM Real Estate can do for its clients is find high-quality tenants as well as manage it, and we also maintain the properties. So if furnace goes out, dishwasher, things like that, we can take care of that, and then eventually you're going to want to sell it. So when we talk about the advantages and disadvantages of buying and holding versus buying and flipping, the majority of the advantages are going to be jilted towards holding property. So number one is you're going to be receiving a monthly income on it if you decide that you're going to hold it, whereas in a flip, it's a single transaction. Once it's said and done, it's over. So, and then the other nice thing about when you're doing a buy and hold is you're actually able to withdraw your equity from that property via a cash-out refinance, and that equity is tax-free because you haven't sold it, you haven't realized a gain. So using hypothetical numbers, let's say you buy a property for $100,000, you put $50,000 into it, and it's worth $250,000. A bank will typically give you about 75 to 80% of that value on a mortgage, and so you've just basically taken $40,000 to $50,000 in tax-free cash in your pocket, and you still own the property, and you're still renting it out and making money on all of that. And then appreciation potential. The last 7 or 8 years have been just utterly fantastic for appreciation. Almost everything has gone up in value, as you guys probably are well aware. You're not going to really get to see that in a flip. I read a statistic that said that the average appreciation rate in Minnesota since 1970 is 4.57% a year. So it's not stellar, but it's definitely something, and that's taking into account a couple of corrections along the way as well. One of the other advantages to buying and holding is the tax advantages. So there's a whole nother course that we have just on real estate taxation. I can't possibly cover it all tonight, but suffice it to say that you're going to get the interest, the property taxes, the repairs, maintenance, and all those things as deductions against your rental income, but you're also going to get depreciation, which is what I refer to as the phantom deduction. So basically what that is the IRS says that your property has basically three different things. It's got land, building, and personal property. So the land is obvious. That's the dirt that it sits on. They say that the land is not depreciable because they're not making any more of it. It's typically going up in value. The building for residential has a lifespan of 27 and a half years. So let's say if the building is worth $200,000, divide that by 27 and a half, and that's a deduction that you get to take every year, regardless of the fact that you didn't actually pay anything for that. And then the last is personal property. So if you imagine taking a house, flipping it upside down and giving it a shake, if it moves, that's personal property. That's depreciable over 5 years, and that's really kind of the kicker to all of this, is that first 5 years getting to use the depreciation deduction on personal property to save you a lot on taxes. The other thing is that rents typically go up over time. Just like anything else, the cost of living just continues to go up. So my very first rental that I used to live in was a townhome in Burnsville. I bought it in 2007 at the height of the market for $197,000. And then a few years later, I decided that I wanted to move into a bigger house. I was forced with the dilemma of, do I sell it for $110,000 and come to closing with $80,000, which I didn't have, so that wasn't an option. I could do a short sale on it. That was also not an option that I was really considering because I wanted to invest in more real estate. Or I could foreclose on it. Also not a great option. So what did I do? I rented it. The very first time I rented it, the property, I rented it for $1,300, and every year since then, I've increased the rent on it $50. So it's at $1,600 7 years later. So not a bad increase. And then the last benefit is there's fewer transactional costs. So when you buy it and you hang on to it, you're not having to pay a broker fee to sell it. You're not having to pay closing costs or title fees or things of that nature. Now there's some disadvantages, right? You never hear anybody talk about how they got super rich off of their one residential rental property, right? But you'll certainly hear people brag about, and thanks to HGTV and all those places, you hear about, oh, I bought this house for $200,000, I put $50,000 into it and sold it for $400,000. Well, I guess that does happen. I'm not going to lie, but the majority of them aren't that big of rips. But if you want to make $25,000 to $100,000 on a single transaction, flipping is going to be your best bet for that. And then one of the other downsides to owning rental properties is the repairs and maintenance. So you're going to have to keep these properties up. If you want to attract quality tenants, you're going to have to offer a quality product. So that means when things break, you're fixing them, you're on it right away. The best tenants have discerning taste, and you want to attract them. And then the last kind of disadvantage is the vacancy risks. So, for example, if this property sits for a month, you're going to have to cover that mortgage payment, taxes, insurance, all that out of pocket. So definitely, like most lenders, like Brian was telling me earlier that his company requires a 6-month reserve for a rental property. They just want to know that you got a little bit of money tucked away in case something doesn't go right. So again, this is another cliche here, but it really doesn't matter how much money you make. It's how much money you save and invest that matters. So if you make $100,000 a year and you spend $100,000 a year, you're not really doing anything to get ahead. But if you make $60,000 a year and you're saving $20,000, putting it into your investments, you can actually, in time, surpass the other person in spite of the fact that their income exceeds yours. So we're going to talk just a little bit about the different types of financial calculations. The first one is capitalization rate. Most people refer to this as cap rate, the acronym for it. And it's arrived at by taking the net operating income of the property and dividing it by the total acquisition price to come up with your cap rate. And I have an example of that on the next slide so you guys can follow along and make sure that you understand it. And then cash on cash return. This is a little bit more complicated and there's more variables to it, but suffice it to say it's a product of how much money did I put down and how much money am I getting back. So if you're getting 20% cash on cash return, that just means that you're getting 20% of the money you put into it. An individual rate of return, that's pretty complicated. I'm not going to go into that today. So this is a hypothetical scenario here where you have rental income of $18,000, and I use nice clean numbers so that this came out a little bit cleaner, and let's say your property taxes, this is your income, these are all your different expenses, and you have a net operating income of $11,250. That's before you're paying your debt service, mind you. And then let's say you paid $140,000 for the property and put $4,000 into the closing costs and $7,000 into the rehab, and this is your basis. We take the net operating income divided by the total cost, and that's how we come up with a 7.45% cap rate. In today's market, anything above a 7 cap, I think, is a great return for residential properties. Cap rate is typically also a product of risk. So if you're in a less desirable area, cap rates are typically going to be higher. If let's say you're buying a apartment building off of Grand Avenue in St. Paul, that's been a desirable place for people to live and to invest for a long time, so that's going to command a lower cap rate. As an investor, you want the highest cap rate that you can get. As a seller, you want to sell it on the lowest cap rate that you can finagle. We're going to talk now a little bit about the differences when you're buying and fixing for the purposes of flip. So again, you have to buy it right. This is the most important part of it. If you're not buying it for value, you're not doing it right. And then you have to rehab the property, you have to list it for sale and sell it. So these are all things that actually VSM Real Estate can help with, is this entire list from top to bottom. When it comes to the actual rehab of your property, this is one of the most important variables when it comes to finding out if this is going to be a successful flip. So what we do is we first try and determine what should we offer for this property, and you kind of have to back into that. We're going to talk about it in a later slide, but you have to determine what your ARV is, which is your after repair value. This is what it will sell for when it's all said and done. From there, you have to back out what it's going to cost to rehab it, what do you want to make as a profit, and then that'll help you to determine what you can afford to pay for the property. So its current condition is a big part of that. Where to spend the money, so that's also pretty important. I'll talk about that a little bit more on the scope of work on the next slide, and then figuring out what it will cost. So I'll show you here. So when it comes to the scope of work at a particular property, the structural stuff is the most expensive and unfortunately doesn't really give you any positive return on investment. So if you have a foundation that is wonky, for example, it's going to detract people from wanting to buy your property. But if you have a foundation that's very structurally sound, it doesn't add a dollar in value to your house. So if you have to spend money here, it might still be worth doing it, but typically speaking, that's not where you want to spend your dollars. And then the site and job prep type stuff like that, it's really important that you line everything up in a great order as well. So, for example, a recent flip that we did down in Burnsville, it had been vacant for 3 years, and the pipes had frozen as a result, and we had to go in there and, okay, so what are we going to do? It's the middle of winter, and we're taking this thing on. So it doesn't have heat. So, okay, furnace, that's number one. That makes sense. I need our guys to be able to be warm when they're out there. And then second order of business, we should probably fix those broken pipes so that we can get water turned on and hook up dishwashers and sinks and faucets and things of that nature. All of these things typically require permits. They require some coordination with your vendors, with the city, and things of that nature. So having a well-orchestrated plan and not just kind of fumbling about as you go through it is pretty critical. And then last here on the slide is the cosmetics. It's a beauty contest in the end. People are only really willing to pay for what they can see. So if you can spend all of your money on doing things like paint, carpet, appliances, countertops, things of that nature, you found yourself a pretty good flip because every dollar you spend is making a big impact. And that really applies to both renting and flipping, by the way. I always like to tell people that renting is a beauty contest. When you're a prospective tenant looking at a property, you know if the furnace goes out that the owner is obligated by law to fix it, but they're not obligated to put in a stainless steel refrigerator for you. So people typically shop with their eyes on that. This is a spreadsheet that we created to help us to track the cost of a job. So we're going to go through and we're going to write site prep, so demolition, remediation, things of that nature, and then structural, any issues like that. And then we go through and we list out each room. So for example, if it's a 4-bedroom house, we're going to say, upstairs bedroom number 1, upstairs bedroom number 2. If it's got 3 bathrooms, we're going to label them out. And then we're going to go through this property, and we're going to determine what it needs in each and every single room. And by the end, these things should be, 200, 300 cells long before you're done, so that you can have, ideally, as accurate as possible calculation on what this is going to cost to rehab. The ARV and the rehab numbers are the 2 most important calculations that you have to get right, okay? I like to do this with actually the contractors with me. I like to tour it with them, and like certain things I know how much they're going to cost. Like I know how much a water heater costs. I know how much a furnace costs. I've done this long enough to know. But if I think it's going to be 16 hours to paint a room or it's going to be 20 hours to paint a room, I just like to kind of know and have them help me with that. So this is, again, something we'll share later on. Jake asked me to give some real-life examples of flips that we've done. So this one right here, this is the done. I didn't have any before. I wish Jeremy would have gave me some before pictures we could have used. That would be fun. This is on 652 Magnolia in East St. Paul. When we looked at this together, Jeremy, my contractor, and I, we went and looked at it. There was about 6 people standing in this area right here. There was a couch here, and then another couch here, and a pit bull on each couch, and like 6, I want to say crackheads. And they were pretty intimidating. There was a big group showing that a wholesaler had put on for us to take a look at the property, and pretty uncomfortable going through there. But I decided to go for it anyways because I saw the value, and we bought it, and I'll kind of share the numbers on this one in just a minute. And then, we had to basically gut it top to bottom. This one was not an easy one. Aside from the first showing being super awkward, the property got robbed, I think 3 times during the renovation. Our contractors got their tools stolen and our materials and things like that, and they even took the chips out of the contractor's lunch. So some classy people. And then on top of that, we had an issue with illegal dumping. So I didn't have that on my spreadsheet as a cost, but I had to pay for, I think, how many trash hauls did we have to do there, Jeremy? I can't remember. It was approaching double digits, I would say. And then I got a fine for about $2,000 from the city as well because they didn't like that somebody was dumping on my property, so they fined me for it. So I want to say with a disclaimer that the numbers on this one are fairly exceptional as it relates to a percentage return, but I just wanted to share it with you so you knew. I bought this property for $88,000, and we spent $17,500 to rehab it. The city compliance, that's a nice way of saying the city's extortion that they got me for, and then the title fees on the way out. So our basis in it with everything added up was $108,000. I put it on the market on a Tuesday in March thinking, okay, well, I'll line up some showings for the weekend. This will be great. When I did my ARV, I thought it was somewhere between $150,000 and $159,000. I put it on the market for $154,000, thinking somewhere in the middle should attract some attention. Well, what I wasn't expecting is that we would get 23 showings in the first day and have 2 offers at or above asking price in the same period. So I ended up kind of talking to both parties and trying to leverage them a little bit to get their offers up. And then I eventually stopped when the other agent said, my clients really want this property. Their mom lives 3 blocks down the street, and they take care of her and drive her to her treatment and all this kind of stuff. And my buyer grew up in this neighborhood and gave me a whole sob story, so I decided to let greed stop me there and just go with that. So I'm a real estate agent, so I sold it myself, so I was only paying the buy side. They asked me to pay 3% closing costs, so I basically netted $149,000 from that, and paid $108,000, so I made $41,000 on that. $40,000 is a pretty typical profit margin for a flip, but the percentage is not. Typically, you're going to see more like 15 to 20%. There was a time where you could make 30% on these, but unfortunately, the market has tightened up a little bit. But yeah, that's basically the real numbers on an actual deal. So does everybody here at least somewhat familiar with the term ARV, or heard it before? Heard it thrown around? Anybody? It just means the after repair value. So you're basically speculating what will this house be worth when it's all said and done. And by the way, this applies to anything. This could apply to a commercial real estate deal. You could even be buying collector cars and fixing them up and selling them. You just want to know what it's going to be worth when it's all said and done. How is that determined? We like to look at recently sold properties. We call them comps, things that have sold within the last 6 months in the area, typically within a mile. It's a lot easier to find out the ARV of a property that's more commoditized. So, for example, if there's a 100-unit townhome development and they're all 3-bed, 2-bath, 2-car garage, that's going to be extraordinarily easy to figure out what that property is worth. You're just going to look at the pictures of the ones that have sold a little bit and see, okay, well, which one's the nicest one and which one sold for the most, and that's pretty much what I'm going to expect for it. If you're going to be selling something that's unique, so say, for example, it's a structurally unique property in Minnetonka near the lake but not on it, and you have to do this massive overhaul, that's going to be a little tougher. It could range really up to maybe $100,000 what that would sell for. It all kind of depends on the buyer. And then the other thing that we like to do is we try and estimate what all of our costs are associated with selling it, because this is also important. It's, the numbers aren't just what do you buy it for, what do you put into it, and what do you sell it for. You have commissions on the way out. Oftentimes, especially if you're in the sub $300,000 market, the buyers are going to ask you to pay for some closing costs. Typically, their offer is a little bit higher and they're asking for some money back, but just be aware of that. And then there's a number of cities that have what's called a TISH requirement. So that stands for the Truth in Sale of Housing. The actual inspection itself is only $200, but what it does is it creates a kind of a log of what all is wrong with your property. And so if you've got a 100-year-old property and they have a list of things that are below standard or don't meet standards, you may be asked to fix some of those. The other thing to be aware of is when you sell a property to an FHA or a VA buyer, their appraisal is a lot different in the respect that they actually go through and have it's almost like an inspection and appraisal combined. And if they see chipped paint or windows that don't function or any of those kinds of things, they're going to require that those be fixed prior to you closing on it. So those could be some unexpected costs. So I always want to take care of the things that are going to come up later for that reason. So I've kind of touched now on the two different types of buy, fix, rent, and buy, fix, sell. So let's talk about the differences. So you're going to make regular monthly cash flow if you're going to end up hanging on to it and renting it, okay? You also get to take advantage of the tax code versus fighting it. As I mentioned earlier, you get to take the deductions for the depreciation and the interest and property taxes and things of that nature, which is all great. The other nice thing is if you own a property for 1 year or more and you sell it, you're subject to capital gains rate as compared to if you flip it, you're taxed at the ordinary income tax rate, which is like your progressive tax code. So for a little perspective, capital gains rate is 0% if you make under $40,000. So if you flip a property and you only made $35,000 that year, that capital gains is tax-free. It's fantastic. If you make between $40,000 and about $435,000, it's taxed at 15%. And if you make over that $435,000 and you're in the 1%, good for you, you have to pay 20% on that. And by comparison, the ordinary income tax rate's start at 10% and go all the way up to 39.6%. So you're going to pay a lot less taxes just by hanging on to it for a year. The other thing that is nice about renting versus flipping it is you're creating equity in that deal that you can draw against later, and it's tax-free. Unfortunately, there's really no way around a flip being taxed at your ordinary income tax rates. So I've tried to look for every loophole that I can find on this. When you hold a property for over a year, you're eligible to sell it and do what's called a 1031 exchange, where you defer the taxes on the relinquished property into the replacement property. And if you sell the replacement property, you're subject to paying the taxes on the relinquished property as well as the replacement property. But you don't get that. There's no way around it. And then let's see here. And the other thing that kind of sucks about doing a flip is you're entirely based on the number of transactions you do. So if you end up going through a dry spell and you can't find any properties to flip, you're just not making any money. So we'll talk a little bit about rental analysis. Mind you, this is something that we are experts in and would be doing for you, but I wanted to just kind of let you know how we do it. We like to look at what would be our competition. We go on Zillow and Craigslist and HotPads and Trulia and things of that nature. We price it out. We look to see what the competitors are offering. We believe that it's very important to price your property competitively. You don't want to rent it for less than it's worth because you're just kind of giving away money, but you also don't want to overprice it. Sometimes if we look at it and we see that it's going to be, let's say, between $1,600 and $1,700, we might take it out at the $1,650 mark just so that we can get multiple applicants and have the ability to choose from higher quality tenants versus just being beholden to a single option. And then estimating vacancy rate. So this is also pretty important when you're doing your financial analysis. We typically underwrite these with somewhere between 3 and 8% vacancy. So an 8% vacancy assumes that you're basically missing 1 month of rent a year. I would use the 8% if it was something that was, let's say, big and expensive and unique or something like that, or maybe in an undesirable area, things like that. 5% is kind of the typical that we use for the majority of our properties. And then I'd go all the way down to 3% if it's something like our Bonnie Jean building here in St. Paul, for example, has these cool urban lofts, and we almost never have any vacancy on it. So 3% would be safe to say for that. Now, lenders. So they are an incredibly important part of this whole equation here. Without the use of other people's money, you're going to be pretty slow going at this whole thing. So one of the lenders that we work with is our host tonight, Brian Kurzweil at Fairway Mortgage. He is what I refer to as your retail type of lender. So people who are looking to grab a property or two, they're not necessarily big-time real estate investors and things like that. The mortgages that they will provide are going to be mortgages in your name personally. Everything's going to be based on how much money do you make, what's your credit, your ability to service that debt, things of that nature. If you're going to be getting into more than 10 properties, you're going to eventually have to switch to working with commercial type lenders. So one that I work with a lot is Bridgewater Bank, and they've done a lot of our property deals. So, and then as far as the lending fundamentals, I'm just going to kind of briefly touch on these as well. Loan to value. So what that basically means is the relationship between how much am I borrowing against this property as compared to how much is it worth. So if it's worth $100,000 and I'm borrowing $80,000 on it, I'm at an 80% loan to value. Most banks are comfortable with a 75 to 80% loan to value. They don't want to lend 100% of it. The days of getting 100% financing, unfortunately, are pretty much behind us. The only way that you can get pretty much 100% financing is if you're going to buy it to live there and you go with MHFA loan and put $1,000 down, but that's not really applicable to the investment world. I will say, though, that if you can swing it, one of the house hacks that I've always taught my agents and other people that I encounter is buy a duplex or a triplex and use the preferential mortgage programs that you can get by being an owner-occupant. And you can qualify for as little as 3.5% down with an FHA, and then you can live in the one side and rent the other out. So basically, you've got a rental property with next to no money into it, and then once you move out of that unit that you're in, now you've got a second unit. So that's something I highly, highly recommend. Debt coverage ratio and DTI, those are terms that lenders use, and it basically is how much money do I have in debt every month as compared to how much I make. So if you have, let's say, two people each make $100,000, and one of them doesn't have any debt, he's got $100,000 available to, pay a mortgage. If the next person makes $100,000 and they've got a $2,000 a month mortgage payment and a $1,000 a month car payment, they've got $3,000 a month that they can't use to qualify for a mortgage. So being lean and living under your means is really critical for your ability to get financing when you're putting them in your name, especially. There's a lot of strategies that we have used over the years to try and minimize the amount of cash that we have to put in and keep into these deals, because in real estate investing, cash is king. You don't want to leave any more money into the deal than you have to, unless you're, if you're in the growth mode, I should say, if you're near the end of your careers or something, that your objectives might change. But an example of that would be, let's say you find a property that you can pick up for $150,000 and put $30,000 into rehab, so your basis is $180,000, and it's all said and done, it's worth $250,000. It may behoove you to you either buy it cash or borrow money from a hard money lender or somebody else, and then take this property down and then do a refinance later where you can get 75% loan to value on it, and you can take all of your money back because you've built this great equity in it. So if you can keep no money into a deal or very little, that's going to explode your ability to grow. Some of my clients are in the audience here tonight, the Stromleys, Brianne and Aaron. They use this strategy quite a bit. They stripped some equity and bought more investments and things like that, and kind of just get to reuse the cash. We won't go too much into property management because, again, I'm kind of a believer that if you don't know what you're doing, it does not make sense to do this yourself. Somebody's going to eat your lunch. So should you do it yourself or should you hire a professional management company? If you do it yourself, typically you're going to have to try and find somebody on Craigslist, and maybe that isn't always the best idea. But let's see here. Repairs and maintenance, that's another big thing. That's one of the big headaches that we always try and service for our clients. When a toilet breaks, when the water heater goes out or any of that kind of stuff, do you really want to deal with that, or do you want to just have someone else take care of it for you? A professional management company would be great for that. And then as far as attracting the top tier tenants, so that's one thing that we really do to differentiate ourselves in the marketplace. We hire a professional photographer to take photos of every listing that we do, and then we put it out there. We syndicate it to all the most popular websites that people are looking at, and then we have a software that we use to schedule showings. We try and get people to compete against each other to bid up the property, things of that nature, and then basically try and get the best tenant. And I like to always mention here that quality begets quality. So if you want to attract the best tenants, you've got to have the best property. I mean, there's a direct correlation there. So don't think that you can just put some piece of crap out there as is and attract a great tenant. That's not how the world works. This little euphemism I love. I always like to say this so that people can kind of think about what so when you think of in your head, gosh, I really want to buy this. If you just thought of a Louis Vuitton purse or some red bottom heels, there's a chance that you have a poor person's mentality, because those things don't appreciate in value. They're just money gone. There's not really much of a resale value on it. If you're thinking, gosh, I'd really like to buy a house, I'd really like to buy a boat, I'd really like to buy a new car, chances are you have a middle-class mentality of how you view money. But if you're thinking, gosh, I really want to buy an investment property, a business, and I want to be able to have some passive income, some cash flow coming in on it, chances are you're thinking how a rich person would think. Now, I don't mean that to insult anybody or anything, but I just want that to be something that you start thinking of, how you spend your money and the priorities that you have with it. So, I wanted to also let you guys know that this is just kind of an introductory course for what we're planning on doing. We're going to have a couple of beginner level type classes that we're going to offer concurrently. The first one is the fundamentals of investment analysis. This one's really important. Like, if you can understand how to break down the financials of a property, that'll save you a lot of trouble from making a mistake. And then we'll talk a little bit about property management, the fundamentals of keeping your property well maintained, what you should do, where you should and shouldn't spend your money, and then talk a little bit more about real estate lending. I'm also going to be offering some more advanced classes for people who are more sophisticated, looking for like the next level. We're going to talk about real estate taxation. Believe it or not, this is one of my favorite subjects, is real estate taxation, because I'm pretty proud of the fact that for my first 7 years in business, I didn't pay any income taxes while I built my net worth up pretty considerably. Beyond that, and this isn't a popular thing to say, but I got my taxable income down to 0, and I got poverty tax credits and got my property taxes on my home refunded to me by the county. So while I was doing pretty well for myself, and it's not even illegal. So we're going to talk a little bit about where to find investment properties as well. This is the hardest part, in my opinion, is finding viable opportunities. And then forms of alternative financing. Here we'll talk about things like contract for deed, rent to own, option purchases, assignments, things of that nature. Contract for deed is a great vehicle. I actually used it to acquire my first 34 properties, all on contract for deed, and I had a total of $10,000 of my own money involved in acquiring my first 34 properties. Now, granted, that was during the recession, so it's going to be a little bit different these days. We'll talk about advanced investment analysis. That's where we'll go into things like cash-on-cash return and individual return, tax impact, what it's going to look like if I sell in 3 years, 5 years, 7 years. We'll talk about those kinds of things. And then kind of some final tips to get you started in getting out there in doing deals. So I really thought long and hard before the last couple of weeks leading up to this class, why am I doing this? So I read the book Simon Sinek, Find Your Why, and almost every decision, if you just start saying to yourself, why do I do that, and you keep going until you can't go any farther, that's your true why. So here's my process. Why are we doing this? Well, we want you to know that we can do the things that you want to do. We can be your one-stop, your resource for that. So whether it's residential or kind of the entry-level commercial, whether you want to fix and flip, whether you want to rent, all that kind of stuff, we can do it. The other reason is we have excess capacity to be able to service those things right now, especially on the management side. We built our infrastructure when we had 500 properties under management. Now we have 250 as a result of the market conditions being the way that they are. Everybody's selling. So if you want to be a buy and hold person, by all means, we'd love to have your business. The brokerage side, so that's our agents. We've got about 15 real estate agents here that are ready, willing, and able to help you to find properties. And also, I've got the capital to deploy into a deal. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, Ryan, I've got this great deal, I want to partner up on it, you know that I've got everything that you need to be able to make that deal a success. But the real reason, and this is the why where it stops here, okay? So the real reason that I put this on is I'm effectively looking to build an army here of people who share my vision and goal. So whether you're somebody who has money and you want to invest, or somebody who's willing to do the work to be the contractor and provide the labor, maybe you're somebody who can't do either of those two things, you're going to have to provide some value by finding properties. But I'm just letting you know that if you want to do this, you can work with us and we will provide all the tools that you need, and anything that you don't have, we can kind of fill in. So that's the true why here. So if all of you guys that are interested, please talk to my team here when it's all said and done, and talk to Brian there in the back. I just wanted to say again, Jake mentioned it earlier, but thanks for providing the food and beverage. He's the guy in the sport coat back there. And so now we're just going to kind of open it up to a Q&A forum, and you guys can let me know if you have any questions about what we discussed tonight.
Ryan, Tim Ramey, Coldwell Banker here. I have a question on maybe more towards Ryan, the lender. You mentioned that when you buy a property, put it in your personal name. What is the ramifications doing that versus putting it in your own separate LLC for every investment property?
Did everybody hear the question? Okay. So if you put it in your name personally, yes, that is slightly less ideal from a asset segregation standpoint. It's typically recommended that you hold the property in an LLC so that they're separate. But what a lot of people will do if they put the mortgage in their name is they'll do a master lease agreement between themselves personally and their LLC. And they give their LLC the authority then to hire a management company and make decisions on their behalf. You set up a bank account in the name of the LLC, you receive your rent in the name of the LLC, and you pay your expenses out of it. You sign for things as XYZ LLC by Ryan Schroder, its owner, and all those things. And that's how we've typically seen people do it.
Even if I'm the only one in the LLC, I can do that?
Yes. Yep. And a single member LLC like that is just a pass-through for tax purposes as well, and it's pretty straightforward. It's just a master lease agreement. That's what we've done in the past. So the only downside of doing that is that your name is still on the tax record, so it's not hard to find you if they wanted to sue you personally. But
I do that with every one. I would have a separate LLC. Or do you have one LLC for all of your properties? Don't you have a separate LLC for every property?
You know, that's kind of a matter of opinion, right? So if you hold each property in a separate LLC, you get the maximum in terms of asset segregation. So if you get sued at property A, property B, C, and D are all safe. The downside to doing that, especially if you're doing it as a partnership, is, well, if you're doing it as a partnership, you have to file a tax return for every partnership, and you have to produce a K-1 for said partnership. If you're doing it as an individual, since they all flow to your personal tax forms through a Schedule E, you're not really going to create a bunch of extra work for yourself. So it's a little easier if you're a single member. And just so you guys know, too, a married couple that file together are considered one. It can still be considered a single member LLC and be a pass-through, so you don't have to treat it like a partnership. Yeah. Yeah.
You said the management company. You guys do that?
Yeah.
You typically do the 10% of the monthly rent, or what do you guys usually charge in that capacity?
We have two fees that we charge. One is the tenant placement fee, and that's everything that's incorporated in finding a great tenant. For that, we charge 1 month's rent, and then our ongoing monthly management fee is a flat fee of $100 per month. So regardless if it's a $2,000 or $1,000 a month property. Yep. Love the questions. Anybody else have any questions they'd like to ask? Daniel, my protege.
How do you find deals?
It's hard. That's the hardest part. So right now, myself, Nick, and Katie are looking for deals on a daily basis. So we do everything from going on to Craigslist, on to Zillow. We look at coming soons. We look at listings that have been on the market for a long time. We look on the MLS. We've done everything from putting out those little bandit signs that say we buy houses. I bought a handful of properties from different wholesalers. I go to MINREA and networking events and try and meet people. When I meet somebody who is a wholesaler and has access to properties, I like to kind of grease their wheels a little bit and say, bring them to me first. I'm a cash buyer. I can do the deal. I just did one the other day that I'm closing on in a few days. He knew I was an agent, and he was an agent too, but I let him keep the commission and keep the $10,000 on it just so he would give it to me versus to someone else. So sometimes you got to get creative to find deals. I can tell you that there is no silver bullet. There is no easy way to do it. We're doing letters to people that are in pre-foreclosure. We're driving through neighborhoods and writing down the addresses of distressed-looking houses and using People Finder to reverse search them and call them and email them. If you think that this is going to be easy and a get-rich-quick thing, it is not, unfortunately. It is a lot of work, but it can be very fruitful. Where you find properties?
Brokers.
Yeah, brokers are great. It's going to be a little harder to find them under market value if they're on the market, but sometimes you do. I did buy one flip off of the MLS. It was a short sale, or not a short sale, but a foreclosure. So Daniel's had more success on Craigslist. So it's the wild, wild west on Craigslist. Any other questions? Brianne, sorry.
You're looking at doing a flip. What is the goal in regards to the rehab to getting it on the market? What's kind of your timeline with that?
obviously as fast as possible, right? So every day you're hanging on to it, it's increasing your carrying cost. So one way that I really look at it is, I actually look at it as how much money do I need to make as a product of how long is it going to take. So if I can go into a property and I can slap paint, carpet, and a couple things and be in and out of it in 2 weeks, I'll be okay with a lower percentage return on that than I would be if I have to, completely build out a basement, add a bathroom, add a bedroom, things like that. I'm going to be looking for a higher margin on it. But typically speaking, I would say 2 to 3 weeks on the very low end for a rehab, assuming that it's primarily cosmetic, up to 3 months. We actually had one flip project that we did out in Bloomington, and it took 14 months, and it had a lot to do with the city getting involved because when we started renovating the garage, we found out that the garage was over the property boundary, and because we were going to be doing work on it, they wouldn't allow us to do it, so we ended up having to bulldoze it, had to redesign, get an architect to redo the whole house and everything, and so sometimes they take a long time, but if you can target 2 to 3 months at most, that would be ideal. Ryan?
What's your overall view of the Twin Cities market in the coming 3 to 5 years?
If I had a crystal ball, I would be playing the Powerball. But generally speaking, I read all the different, like the National Association of Realtors put out something recently, and there's a couple of other publications that I've read, and everybody seems to think that it's going to kind of remain status quo for a little while longer. I've been thinking that the end of 2019, early 2020 might be about when it crests and then kind of maintains for a little while before it goes down some. But again, I don't really know. Every year that it keeps going up, I'm surprised. So I wish I had a good answer for you.
Ryan, do you typically just invest in the Twin Cities, Minnesota, or do you go in surrounding states as well?
I only invest in the Twin Cities and within about a 25-mile radius from where we sit right now because our infrastructure for management and maintenance is all here, and my leasing agents don't like to drive very far. So, but I know plenty of people that are investing in other markets, and they seem to be doing fairly well with it. Many years ago, when this whole real estate market was just heating up, people from the coast, New York, California, et cetera, they were coming to Minnesota in droves and investing here. Now they've said, oh, well, this place is a little bit more tapped out. So they've moved to markets like Milwaukee, Cincinnati, St. Louis, kind of the Rust Belt. So, any other questions? Well, fantastic. I appreciate everybody coming out tonight. Thank you for the support. And we've got some real estate agents and lenders and people kind of floating around. So if you have questions, feel free to ask. Thank you.